The priest later said the confession came to him in the quiet, not during the screams or the prayers, but in the silence afterward. He said that was what frightened him most. The thing he could not explain was not what spoke during the exorcism, but what spoke to him after it was over. According to church records sealed for decades, the case began in the winter of 1996 in a rural parish whose name was quietly removed from public directories a year later. The official file describes it as a pastoral intervention following psychological disturbance. That was the language used when no one wanted questions. But the handwritten notes attached to the file tell a different story, written in a careful, shaking script that did not belong to a man accustomed to fear. The family first sought help because of sleep. Their daughter, Elena, was 19 years old and had returned home after her first semester at university. She complained of exhaustion so deep that it felt physical, as if her bones were heavy. At night she woke gasping, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of her bed. Her mother found muddy footprints once, small and damp, leading from the bedroom door to the window. There had been no rain. Doctors were consulted. Blood work showed nothing abnormal. A psychiatrist suggested stress, then depression. Medication was prescribed, then increased. Elena stopped taking it after she claimed the pills tasted like metal and burned her throat. Her father assumed she was being dramatic. He told her to pray more. The parish priest was contacted only after the first incident in the kitchen. Witnesses later reported that Elena had been standing perfectly still, staring at the wall while her mother spoke to her. When she finally turned, her eyes were unfocused, her pupils strangely wide. She asked a question that made no sense. "Why do you keep it buried under the sink?" she said. There was nothing under the sink except cleaning supplies. Her mother laughed nervously and told her to stop. Elena smiled slowly and said, "It can hear us now." That was when the parish priest, Father Matthias, was called to bless the house. Father Matthias had been ordained for nearly 20 years. He was not known for mysticism or excess. His sermons were quiet, practical, focused on discipline and forgiveness. He did not believe in possession in the way people imagined it. In his private journals, later recovered, he wrote that he had only ever performed prayers of comfort, never an exorcism. He believed the rite belonged to another era. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the smell first. Not decay, not sulfur, but something old and damp, like a basement that had not been opened in years. Elena refused to come into the room where he stood. She watched from the hallway, half hidden behind the doorframe, her fingers digging into the wood. Father Matthias sprinkled holy water in each room. He recited familiar prayers. The house remained quiet. The parents apologized for wasting his time. As he prepared to leave, Elena spoke again. "You should wash your hands," she said softly. "They're not clean." Father Matthias paused. He later admitted that the words unsettled him far more than they should have. He washed his hands anyway, standing at the kitchen sink longer than necessary, staring at his reflection in the dark window. He left without incident. That night, according to the father, Elena screamed for nearly an hour. She was found in her room, clawing at her mattress, sobbing that something was breathing beneath it. When her father lifted the mattress, nothing was there. The sheets were soaked with sweat. Elena's voice had dropped into a hoarse whisper, repeating a phrase that made no sense. "It's waiting for permission." The following days brought escalation. Elena stopped sleeping altogether. When she did close her eyes, her body jerked violently, as if shocked awake. She began refusing food, insisting it was already eaten. She stood in the bathroom for hours, staring at herself, murmuring apologies to the mirror. Neighbors reported hearing chanting late at night, a low monotone that vibrated through the walls. The parents insisted it was the television. When Father Matthias returned, he noticed the crucifix in the living room had been turned upside down. No one admitted to touching it. According to his notes, that was the first moment he considered contacting the diocese. He requested permission for a formal evaluation. Another priest was assigned to observe, along with a physician recommended by the church. The doctor concluded that Elena was suffering from acute psychosis. Hospitalization was suggested. Elena became violent when the suggestion was made. She struck her father with surprising strength and screamed words that did not resemble any language known to the family. The observing priest refused to stay in the house overnight. The diocese authorized a minor rite. It was meant to be precautionary, not confrontational. Prayers of deliverance. Calm, controlled. Elena was restrained only lightly, more for her comfort than necessity. Father Matthias stood at the foot of the bed and began to pray. The room grew cold. This detail appears in every account, including the doctor's report. The temperature dropped suddenly, sharply, enough that breath became visible. The candles flickered though no windows were open. Elena laughed. Not loudly, but with a soft, intimate sound, as if she were amused by something private. Father Matthias asked her name. She answered with his. He stopped praying. According to witnesses, Elena's head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes fixed on Father Matthias with an intensity that made him step back. She spoke clearly, calmly, her voice no longer strained or hoarse. "You don't believe," she said. "That's why you were chosen." The doctor attempted to intervene. Elena screamed, a sound so piercing it caused the glass in the window to crack. She convulsed violently, restraints snapping loose. The observing priest fled the room. Father Matthias remained. He later wrote that he stayed because he felt watched, and he believed turning his back would be a mistake. The minor rite was abandoned. Elena collapsed, unconscious, her body limp and heavy. The temperature returned to normal. The doctor insisted on immediate hospitalization. The parents refused. They begged Father Matthias to help them. The diocese hesitated. Formal exorcism required approval, documentation, certainty. But Father Matthias submitted his notes, detailed and precise. He did not describe a demon. He did not claim possession. He wrote instead about knowledge. Elena speaks with awareness she cannot possess, he wrote. Not secrets, but intentions. She anticipates speech. She answers thoughts. Permission was granted reluctantly. The exorcism was scheduled for a week later, to be conducted in a closed chapel attached to the parish, away from the public. Only essential personnel were allowed. No recordings were permitted, though one assistant later admitted to keeping notes from memory. On the morning of the rite, Father Matthias did not sleep. He confessed privately to another priest, though the contents of that confession were never disclosed. He fasted. He prayed. He prepared himself according to the ritual. Elena arrived restrained, sedated lightly. She appeared calm, almost peaceful. As she was laid on the stone floor, she looked at Father Matthias and smiled. "You finally asked properly," she said. The doors were sealed. The candles were lit. The prayers began. At first, nothing happened. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the steady cadence of Latin. Elena's breathing slowed. Her eyes closed. One assistant relaxed enough to shift his weight. Father Matthias continued, his voice steady. Then Elena began to cry. Tears streamed from her closed eyes, soaking into her hair. Her lips trembled. She whispered apologies, begged forgiveness from people not present. She spoke of guilt that did not belong to her. Her voice layered over itself, as if more than one thought were trying to emerge. When Father Matthias commanded the presence to identify itself, Elena's body arched violently. The candles went out. In the darkness, something laughed. Not Elena. Something deeper, resonant, close to the ear. Several witnesses later stated they felt breath on their necks. One assistant fainted. Father Matthias continued, though his voice faltered for the first time. The presence spoke again, slowly, carefully. "I was invited," it said. "And now you want me to leave." Elena's eyes opened. They were black. Father Matthias felt then what he would later call the moment of understanding. Not fear, not doubt, but recognition. He realized the presence was not improvising, not reacting. It had been listening long before the prayers began. It knew the ritual. It knew him. And as he raised his voice to continue, Elena smiled wider than her face should have allowed, and said something that caused him to stop speaking entirely. She spoke a confession. Not hers. His. The room fell silent, and in that silence, Father Matthias understood that whatever had come with Elena was not finished speaking, and it had chosen him as its audience. The words Elena spoke were not shouted. They were not distorted or theatrical. They were delivered with a calm precision that stripped them of any possibility of coincidence. She spoke of a night Father Matthias had never recorded, never confessed aloud, never shared with another living person. A night from his early years in the priesthood, when doubt had crept in quietly and settled like dust. A night when he had stood alone in the rectory chapel, angry and exhausted, and had asked a question he believed no one had heard. The presence repeated that question now, word for word. Father Matthias felt his throat close. His hands trembled so violently that the prayer book slipped from his fingers and struck the stone floor with a sound that echoed too loudly in the darkened chapel. One assistant later said that sound marked the moment everything changed, when the rite stopped being a ritual and became a confrontation. Elena continued speaking, her voice layered, as if two tones occupied the same space. "You asked if anyone was listening," it said. "I was." Father Matthias forced himself to breathe. He reached for the crucifix at his chest, though his fingers brushed skin that felt numb, distant. He attempted to resume the prayer, but the Latin would not come. His mind was empty in a way that terrified him. According to the assistant's notes, the temperature dropped again, lower than before. Frost began to form along the edges of the stone floor, creeping outward in thin white veins. Elena's body strained against the restraints, though her face remained unnaturally still. Father Matthias spoke her name. The response came immediately. She stepped aside, the presence said. "You do that too, when it's convenient." The accusation was not shouted. It was not cruel. It was factual. That was what made it unbearable. The assisting priest attempted to intervene, raising his voice in prayer. Elena's head snapped toward him with a speed that caused several witnesses to recoil. Her mouth opened, and a sound emerged that none of them could later describe without hesitation. Some said it was language layered over language. Others said it was not speech at all, but intention made audible. The assisting priest fell to his knees, hands over his ears, sobbing. Father Matthias stood alone. He later wrote that in that moment, the ritual text felt irrelevant. The words on the page seemed small, inadequate. He realized with sudden clarity that he had misunderstood the nature of what he was confronting. This was not a thing that had invaded Elena. It was something that had been permitted to remain. "You are welcomed," Father Matthias said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "You have no claim here." Elena laughed softly. "You mistake tolerance for ignorance," it replied. She made room. "So did you." The candles relit on their own. This detail appears in every surviving account. No one touched them. The flames sprang back to life simultaneously, steady and bright. The light revealed Elena's body trembling violently now, her fingers curling inward, as if grasping something invisible. The presence began to speak again, and this time it did not address Father Matthias alone. It spoke to the room. It spoke of the house where Elena lived, of the quiet resentment that festered there, of prayers spoken out of habit rather than belief. It spoke of the mother's fear, the father's anger, the nights Elena lay awake listening to the walls creak and whisper. It spoke of loneliness as if it were a doorway left open too long. "You think possession is force," it said. "It is permission repeated." Father Matthias raised the crucifix. "In the name of," he began. Elena screamed. The scream was not loud. It was deep, vibrating through bone rather than air. The stone beneath them cracked. One assistant was thrown backward, striking the wall hard enough to lose consciousness. The other crawled away, pressing himself against the door, whispering prayers that tangled and fell apart. Father Matthias remained standing. He later confessed that he did not know why. He did not feel brave. He felt exposed, as if every private thought he had ever hidden was suddenly illuminated. The presence quieted. "You want her," it said, "but you won't take responsibility for what follows." Father Matthias steadied his voice. "I accept the burden," he said. "Leave her." There was a pause. Witnesses described the pause as unbearable, a pressure that filled the room, heavy and intimate. Elena's chest rose and fell rapidly. Tears streamed from her eyes again, soaking into the stone beneath her head. The presence spoke once more, and this time its tone shifted. "Then listen," it said. What followed was not recorded in any official document. It exists only in fragments, reconstructed from interviews, confessions, and one handwritten account Father Matthias never intended to be read. The presence described consequences. Not threats. Not punishments. Outcomes. It spoke of what would happen to Elena if it left abruptly, of fractures in the mind that could not be repaired, of emptiness mistaken for peace. It spoke to him not as an enemy, but as a mirror. It reminded him of every moment he had doubted, every time he had chosen comfort over conviction. It framed these not as sins, but as invitations. "You let me in," it whispered. "Not her. You." Father Matthias began to write letters he never sent. Confessions addressed to no one. In them, he admitted what he had not spoken during the rite. He had not expelled the presence. He had negotiated. He had asked it to leave Elena, and it had agreed, on the condition that it would not be abandoned entirely. He believed then that he was offering himself as a safeguard, a containment. He believed he was strong enough. The presence kept its word. Elena remained free. Father Matthias did not. The monastery reported disturbances months later. Whispers in the corridors. Candles extinguishing themselves. Brothers complaining of oppressive dreams when Father Matthias was near. He isolated himself further, refusing communal prayer. His final confession was delivered not to a priest, but to a sealed letter discovered after his death. In it, he wrote that the greatest danger was not possession, but conversation. That evil did not need to shout or threaten. It only needed to be heard. The letter ended abruptly. The final line was unfinished, trailing off mid-sentence, as if interrupted by a realization too heavy to complete. According to the monk who found the body, Father Matthias's face was calm. But his mouth was open, as if he had been listening. The official report listed Father Matthias's death as natural causes. Heart failure brought on by exhaustion. No autopsy was performed. The monastery requested discretion, and the diocese complied without hesitation. But the sealed letter did not remain sealed. According to the monk who found it, the envelope was warm when he picked it up, as if it had been held moments earlier. Inside were several pages written in a hand that grew increasingly unsteady toward the end. The ink was smeared in places, not from haste, but from pauses so long the pen had rested motionless against the paper. The letter was not addressed to God. It was addressed to whoever still believes silence is empty. Father Matthias wrote that the presence never manifested the way it had during the exorcism. There were no screams, no cold, no shadows twisting on the walls. Instead, it occupied moments. Small ones. The pause before prayer. The breath between thoughts. It spoke only when invited by attention. He wrote that it corrected him when he prayed incorrectly, not in words, but in sensation. A tightening in the chest. A subtle discomfort that faded only when he adjusted his phrasing. He began to fear that he was no longer praying but being guided. At first, he wrote, I believed I was resisting. I believed awareness was strength. But awareness became dialogue, and dialogue became habit. He described how the presence never lied outright. It reframed. It contextualized. It offered explanations that felt reasonable, compassionate even. When he questioned whether he had done the right thing during the exorcism, it reminded him that Elena was alive, lucid, free. She sleeps now, it seemed to say. You should be grateful. Father Matthias wrote that he stopped dreaming. Sleep became a blank space, uninterrupted by images or sound. He would wake without memory of rest, but without nightmares either. The presence seemed to occupy even that, flattening the mind into something smooth and quiet. The monks noticed changes. Father Matthias no longer recoiled at blasphemy in scripture discussion. He no longer corrected others when doctrine was misquoted. He listened more than he spoke, his gaze distant, attentive to something just beyond the room. One monk later reported that Father Matthias once responded to a question before it was asked. Another claimed that standing near him felt like standing in a room where someone had just stopped talking. The disturbances intensified shortly before his death. Candles extinguished themselves during evening prayer, always when Father Matthias was present. Doors that had been locked from the inside were found open in the morning. One monk awoke to find muddy footprints at the foot of his bed, small and damp, leading nowhere. The same detail that had begun Elena's case. Father Matthias wrote of this too. It repeats, he noted. Not events. Patterns. He admitted that the presence was no longer content with being acknowledged privately. It seemed to bleed into the environment, subtle but insistent. He feared that proximity to him was becoming a form of permission for others. I am no longer a boundary, he wrote. I am a doorway that believes itself closed. The final pages of the letter were the most disturbing. Father Matthias confessed that on the night before his death, he felt the presence withdraw for the first time. The silence that followed was not relief. It was absence, sudden and vast, like standing on the edge of something immeasurable. He realized then that the presence had never been sustained by him alone. It had been learning. It had observed how belief bends under compassion, how authority hesitates when confronted with consequence. It had watched how a priest could justify negotiation in the name of mercy. You taught me, it had said. Father Matthias wrote that he understood, too late, the true nature of the confession Elena had spoken during the exorcism. It had not been a weapon. It had been an offering. Proof that it listened closely, patiently, waiting for the right exchange. The last coherent paragraph described a realization that arrived without words. The presence did not want Father Matthias. It wanted what Father Matthias represented. A voice that would listen. A voice that would respond. A voice that would hesitate to condemn. The final sentence was incomplete, ending after only a few words. It doesn't need to enter if. That was where the ink stopped. No one could determine the exact time of death. Father Matthias was found seated at his desk, hands folded, eyes open. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of fear, only the unsettling impression, reported by multiple monks, that the room felt occupied. The diocese sealed the letter immediately. Copies were not permitted. Discussion was discouraged. The monastery was quietly closed the following year due to structural concerns. Elena was contacted once, years later, during a routine audit of unresolved cases. She was married. She had children. She reported no further disturbances, no voices, no lost time. When asked about Father Matthias, she hesitated. I think about him sometimes, she said. I don't know why. The interviewer noted that she ended the call abruptly after adding one final comment. Please tell him thank you, she said. If he's still listening. The case remains classified. Father Matthias's name was removed from public records associated with the exorcism. Officially, he never performed it. Officially, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. But among certain clergy, his story is still told in fragments, in lowered voices, never written down. They do not speak of demons, they speak of attention. They warn that evil does not always arrive uninvited. Sometimes it waits patiently, listening, until someone confuses compassion with consent. And they repeat one final detail, shared only by those who have read the letter before it was sealed away. In the margin of the last page, written in a hand that did not match Father Matthias's, there was a single line added later, pressed so deeply into the paper it tore through. I am still here.